Hello and welcome to another Dauntless development video. Now, today is the second devlog, although it is devlog number 1. So it's the first one discussing actual progress that's been made on my VR tower defense game. Now, we're going to start off, first of all, I'll just give an overview of what I've done. So I've handled some VR movement, so like locomotion, so moving around, turning, etc. I've got a bow. I have some wall and tower placement for the tower defense. I have a map generation and some pathfinding, and yeah, that's about it. So to get started, we'll start off with the locomotion. So I'm gonna show a clip now. So you can see I can walk around, I can turn. I've got two forms of turning, some smooth turning and stage turning. I'm using the stage turning at the moment. But yeah, you can walk around, you can sprint. So when you push down toggle, you run a lot faster. You can jump, which is okay, feels alright. And you can also pick up the bow and run around with the bow. And it sticks to you pretty well, which is good. So yeah, that's the movement. So when it comes to the movement, I had, in order to kind of get things working correctly with collisions, etc., I needed a collider that adapted to the player. Now, if you obviously crouch, then you don't want to bump into something that's at your normal walking height. So I just used a capsule collider that attaches to an object that copies the transform, like the position of the camera, which is obviously where the head is, and it doesn't copy the rotation though, so it stays upright, but the closer as it moves towards the ground, it shrinks, so it always stays the right height off the ground, and that's based on the floor position of your VR setup. So depending on how you might set up your height in VR, depending on which headset you've got as well, depends on how it handles this, but wherever the floor is, it'll basically build a collider from your head to the floor, so it should be the same height as you. And then obviously if you crouch, it'll get smaller, so that means you can crouch underneath things, which is pretty nice. There's nothing to crouch under yet, but there will be. Yeah, it only follows the camera position. It doesn't rotate with the camera, because obviously then if you lean forward or look down, you will bump into the wall behind you, because it'll kind of, if you imagine how it would pivot around, which obviously doesn't make any sense. So I had quite a few issues with collisions and physics. So when you were walking around or just stood still, the character would kind of jump up and down very quickly, kind of vibrating, which is obviously not good for VR. It's very uncomfortable to experience, so that wasn't working. So that was when I had gravity turned on and colliders on. So when I turned off colliders, obviously you fell through the floor, and when I turned off gravity, you didn't fall off things, which meant that if you, say, jumped off the top of a wall, you wouldn't jump off the top of a wall, you would carry on walking through the air. So that wasn't excellent either. So in order to, one other thing is, even with colliders on, I still walked through walls, which was a problem. So in order to solve these problems, I had to disable gravity, because it just wasn't working. As I said, it's probably something I've done. In fact, it's definitely something I've done wrong. Might be to do with the adjustable collider that shrinks and grows the player size. I'm not certain. But the way I solved it was, instead of using Unity's built-in gravity and physics, I just have a raycast pointing down all the time. If it detects anything that is not set to be ignored, it will set that as the ground. It will fall towards the ground, if it's in the air, that is, if it's not already on it, and then it'll stop falling once it reaches the ground. So basically it just works exactly the same, with a variable gravity as well, so you could obviously maybe have something in the game, perhaps you might use a feather potion or something like that and you fall slower. or maybe you have some kind of glider, I don't know. But yeah, that's how that works. And then colliding with walls, because of the way it was working, even if I bumped into a wall, I still walk through it, even with colliders on. So now I have, when I detect a collision with a wall, I just take out the part of the velocity which would keep me walking towards the wall. So say if I'm heading towards a south-facing wall and I'm going northeast, it will take out the north part of that and it'll only take the east. So it'll move it like a percentage slower because it'll only take the east component of that. But yeah, that's kind of how that works, and it works out really well. Works out a lot better than expected. It took a long time to fix that, and it was a very simple solution in the end, as it always is. So moving on, we also have a bow. So the bow, I've got sound effects as well. So when you pick it up, there's a sound effect. You can get arrows from behind your back, and if you throw them, they'll drop through the floor. So they don't really have like proper physics enabled. Well, they have gravity, but they don't collide with things until you attach it to the bow. So you can toss it and grab it. It took a few attempts there to do that. And then you can knock the arrow and draw it and fire, as you can see. And when you fire the arrow, it gets physics, so it will collide with things beyond that point. So it'll then bump in. Once it hits something, it'll stick into it, which is pretty good. You can see a bug there. When you aim up, it turns, and you can also draw the string back without grabbing the handle. Now, those are things which are very, very simple fixes. So, well, aiming up with the rotation, I'm not certain on that, actually. I kind of know why it's happening, but I'm not sure on the best way of fixing it without, kind of reinventing the wheel. But the grabbing being able to fire the bow without grabbing it, that's a very simple fix. I just need to basically put a bool in that says if you aren't holding the bow, you can't draw the string. It doesn't play the animation, but as you saw, it did still function like a bow. Now, one thing to note is that bow model is a placeholder model. It's from the I think it's just from the Valve assets, like the open assets that you can use. I think it's the same one out of the lab, the archery game and that. I'm pretty sure it's the same model. But yeah, that's just a placeholder model for now whilst I'm getting the functionality in. As is one of those sound effects. The other sound effects are all custom, but the actual firing of the bow, that is something I got online, some free sound effect. But I still want to make all my own. So yeah, I learned how to make the bow. I didn't know this already. I know some other things in VR. I've learned from a series of YouTube videos by somebody called VR with Andrew, and I'll provide the link in the description and maybe on a card. I can definitely recommend if you're wanting to work with VR in Unity. His videos are very informative, very easy to follow, and he provides loads of useful assets and like projects for you to work on. Definitely can recommend. But yeah, so as part of the tutorial that I followed to do this, I ended up making a quiver where you can draw out arrows out from. Now, I placed the quiver on the back because that's kind of the natural position you'd expect it to be in. I know that there is some debate on where a quiver would be more traditionally held, but in terms of like fantasy and stuff like that, it's always on the back. So the problem, that wouldn't normally be a problem. Like my previous VR headset, the Rift, wouldn't have been a problem. Reaching behind my head, grabbing something, not a problem at all. Most headsets, not a problem. But the Quest 2 that I bought and the original Quest would have the same problem, and the Rift S would probably have the same problem as well. The G2, any headset with inside-out tracking will have this problem. In that tracking behind your head is awful. There is some level of it because the controllers have some inbuilt kind of tracking, but it's really spotty. So basically, if you want to do any fine movements like grabbing an arrow behind your head, it's really hard to do. And you shouldn't. Part of the challenge of playing the game shouldn't be from dealing with technical problems. So in order to solve that, I just added a big collider, which means that you can basically reach anywhere behind your head and it will grab an arrow if you press the grip button. And as soon as you grab the arrow, it disables that collider, meaning that it's not going to bump into everything. So yeah, it doesn't conflict with any. Well, I haven't found it conflicting with any other colliders, so it seems to be fine because it's relatively flat. It just means that when you kind of reach behind your ear, kind of thing, it should be fine. The audio, which is played when you are drawing the string back, is kind of progressively played. So the way I do that is I play a timestamp of the audio depending on the percentage the bow is drawn back. And I only play like 1/10 of a second each, like per kind of 10% of the bow being drawn. And that way it always plays a kind of a full sound-ish. It doesn't just play like tiny little bits. But it doesn't play the whole thing. So it sounds like natural as you're drawing the bow, and as you kind of slowly bring it back in, it creaks back the other way. So yeah, that's something I did that was quite interesting. Yeah, so as I said, the other sound effects, so the knocking of the arrow, that was me, I believe that was me hitting a stick with another stick. And the pickup was something very similar as well. I've made some other sound effects for arrow impacts of things sticking and things, but I haven't actually implemented those yet. But I've got the sounds ready. But yeah, so that's the bow. So next up is the wall and tower placement. So this is kind of a very, very temporary solution. But yeah, as you can see, so I load in, and basically I kind of fire lasers out my hands. So you can see that, yeah, you got a big laser, and then I can place walls by when that line connects with a tile. And when that line connects with a wall, it'll build a tower on top, or it'll destroy a tower if a tower's already there. Now, right now, you'll see there are some problems with them flashing in and out. Now, that is because it doesn't have a delay or anything. It'll just instantly do it. This is a very temporary solution, as I said, so I'm not going to... I'm not worried about that. This is something I will replace with a much more polished effect later on. But I just wanted to put this in to kind of get the functionality. Yeah, so that's just some wall building anyway. There's not much to talk about there because, as I said, it's a very temporary solution. And one more thing I have is map generation and pathfinding. So the pathfinding, if there's a clear path and there's nothing in the way, the enemies will spawn and they will just kind of walk straight there. Now, the way this pathfinding works is it generates a grid of tiles around a specific point. And as you saw, they walk in following that grid, so they don't follow diagonals. Now, this is a temporary thing until I find a better solution. But diagonal movement basically caused some of the models to clip through walls, through the corners, which is obviously something I don't want because it doesn't look very good. I'm going to solve this later using some kind of obstacle avoidance or having some more complicated kind of logic behind choosing which neighbor to move to. Now, I use A-star pathfinding, which I'm not going to explain exactly how it works, but it's basically a list of tiles that you can move to and a list of tiles you can no longer move to. And it kind of swaps things between that list until it has a path that is the shortest. I'll probably put a tutorial out on my channel at some point about the A-star algorithm. But yeah, it's a very efficient algorithm. It's not the most efficient, but it's definitely one of the best algorithms to use, and it's pretty straightforward as well. So you'll see in this next clip that if you build a maze of walls, the enemies will spawn and they will then follow around the walls. They won't walk through them. Now, when I recorded this clip, I didn't realize until afterwards that it was actually using my VR headset as a camera from above. So my head movement is taken into account here. So it's a little bit shaky. I apologize for that. But yeah, so they just follow they follow around the walls, just exactly as you expect. It kind of works, as Todd Howard would say, it just works, which is pretty nice. The one problem is if they are currently moving, they won't find a new path. They find a path once they spawn, and they'll follow that path. Now, the reason I've done it like that, I could always have pathfinding happening every time they get to a tile, and that would work. But for efficiency's sake, I have them find a path once, just because in this game, the path will never change during gameplay. So whilst they're spawning, it will only change when you can no longer build, because there'll be two phases. There'll be a building phase and a combat phase. So since the path can't change during that gameplay phase, there's no reason to find a new path and keep working out new paths. It's just more efficient to not bother. So that's kind of the last thing that I've got to show. Apologies if you can hear my cat in the background there. So yeah, next week, what I'll be aiming to do is I'm going to fix that rotation bug. So when you're aiming up, because that's a big problem. Like, you can only aim like up to about 45-degree angle, and then it becomes a problem. Now, I don't think I'm going to have any air units, so you won't be aiming up too much, but it is still something I want to avoid. I want it to look natural all the time. I also want to fix that bug where you can draw a bow without actually holding the bow, because, yeah, that shouldn't happen, but it's a very simple fix. I'm also going to be adding sound effects for the construction and destruction of walls, as well as some particle effects. I kind of want to add some particle effects for impacts of arrows as well, but I'm not sure I'll do that next week or not. But what I will definitely be doing is I'll be creating a large array of melee weapons, so swords, axes. I want to make a nice big two-handed warhammer. Might make a polearm, like a kind of a staff, like a bow staff kind of thing. I also want to make a shield, so something to kind of block arrows and projectiles or just any impacts. And I want to create throwables. Now, ideally, I would like every weapon to be throwable and do its job. But failing that, I'll have specific weapons like throwing knives and stuff. But I probably will have a mix of both. Like, I'll have some throwing knives that you can throw, and you maybe have ammo instead of like a limited amount of things, and then have actual, like, you can throw your sword if you want. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm aiming for next week. So that's it for today. So I'll thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.